So President-elect Donald Trump is being inaugurated on Monday, and it's supposed to be cold, like 20 degrees cold. Cold enough that they decided to move the festivities inside. So are you guys going to be around the Capitol, and how do you guys hold up in the cold weather?
I am not trying to pull a William Henry Harrison on Monday, so I will be inside the Capitol, where it tends to be overheated this time of year.
Okay, there we go. We probably need to explain William Henry Harrison for people.
Right. Sorry, that was a dark reference. He was a president who I think died after a month in office. He caught pneumonia, right, at his inauguration. Yeah, I mean, important lesson to be taken from that.
Don't take these things lightly.
Yeah.
Hannah, are you going to be there?
I will be there.
Okay.
But I was also at the Iowa caucuses in January of last year, and that was much worse.
Welcome to the Campaign Moment. It's Friday, January 17th. I'm Aaron Blake, senior political reporter and author of the Campaign Moment newsletter. Today I'm joined by Abby Hauslohner, a national security reporter who focuses on Congress here at the Post. Hey, Abby.
Hello.
And I'm also joined by national politics reporter Hannah Knowles. Hey, Hannah.
Hey.
So, guys, we are in the final days of Joe Biden's presidency and the final days before President-elect Donald Trump takes office for the second time. Today, I wanted to talk about what they've both been up to in the home stretch before the administration changes over. And among those things is an historic ceasefire and hostage deal between Israel and Hamas. The deal aims to bring an end to the 15-month-long Middle East conflict, which began with Hamas attacking Israel on October 7th, 2023. It resulted in tens of thousands of Palestinian deaths. So we'll talk about the deal, how it came about, and the politics of taking credit. I also want to talk about the other big transition news this week, and that's the long-awaited Senate confirmation hearings for Trump's cabinet picks. Nearly a dozen picks appeared before the relevant Senate committees this week, and at least one of them faced some potential danger despite Republican control of the Senate. So we'll get at some of the big questions that loomed over those hearings and what they might tell us about Trump's second term. So let's start there. We can't get into every single hearing and nominee because that would take all day. But some of Trump's picks could have an outsized impact on whether or not he can carry out his agenda. And some are even testing Republican senators' willingness to sign off on certain things that Trump wants. So let's focus on a few of them. I watched some of these hearings, but Abby, you were actually in the Capitol for some of these. Can you talk about which ones you saw and what the stakes were?
So I watched the hearing on Tuesday for Pete Hegseth, who is the former Fox News host who Trump has picked to be defense secretary. And I watched the hearing for Marco Rubio, the Florida senator who Trump has picked to be Secretary of State. They were two very different hearings.
Because Rubio is widely expected to be confirmed. He's a colleague of many of these senators, whereas there was some question about whether Hegseth could be confirmed. There are some Republican senators who signaled that they weren't necessarily sold on him because of various questions about his background and his past. We're talking about allegations of sexual assault, drinking, financial mismanagement. Can you tell me just how that hearing played out and how his confirmation process is looking now?
Well, when Trump first named Hegseth, and I was first asking Republican senators about, what they thought, I got a lot of blank stares. People were sort of like, we were not prepared for this one. They really didn't have any answers. They're like, yeah, I didn't know that he was under consideration. And they sort of had to scramble and be like, well, who is this guy? Okay. And a lot of them kind of hinted at having some serious questions and maybe real concerns that could undermine his confirmation. But what we saw on Tuesday was total lack of dissent from the Republicans. They had gotten in line. They were very friendly to Hegseth. And it seemed, their mission, all of them, was to, kind of support his nomination process and get him through.
And of course, Republicans have a 53-47 majority in the Senate, which means as long as 4 Republican senators don't vote against this guy, he is going to be confirmed. Does it seem like that's likely to be the case now? And how did some of these senators break?
Following that hearing, yeah. My expectation is he's likely to be confirmed. We don't expect any Democrats to vote for Hegseth. He can lose 3 Republicans. There are 3 Republicans, who have not said how they will vote. They haven't said they'll vote against him. But Senator Mitch McConnell, Senator Lisa Murkowski, and Senator Susan Collins have not indicated yet how they will vote. Those are the 3 potential no votes as we see it right now. But Senator Joni Ernst, who was really in the spotlight because she is, she's a veteran, she's a woman, and she's also a sexual assault survivor. And she was expected to be, potentially a big problem for Hegseth. And that is because, in addition to being accused of sexual assault, and to be clear, he was never charged, he has also spoken extensively and written extensively that women do not belong in the military.
In combat.
And in fact, in his latest book, he even disparaged Joan of Arc, which was, sort of funny. A historical mythical figure. And he has had a sort of reversal since being nominated. He actually said right before being nominated that he stood by that women do not belong in combat. And then since being nominated, he has begun saying, women are valuable members of our military and they do great things in combat and so on. And Senator Ernst, who was under a lot of pressure from Trump's base on social media and so on to get in line, had a pretty muted approach to Hegseth. Was very conciliatory and indicated that was she's heard what she needed to hear and she's on board.
Hannah, what are we seeing as far as Republicans lining up behind these nominees? There were some questions about not just Hegseth, but also Matt Gaetz, the initial nominee for Attorney General, who ultimately withdrew amid Republican opposition. We have Tulsi Gabbard being nominated for Director of National Intelligence, who could see some significant opposition from Republicans. Are Republicans just ultimately going to fall in line? Is this a signal of things to come, potentially?
That seems to be where we're going. I remember when the doubts really started rising about Hegseth, and you had a moment where we thought, okay, maybe Ron DeSantis is going to be the defense secretary.
Yeah. The Trump team was actually talking to him about this, apparently.
Yeah, and that was over very quickly because MAGA world kind of decided, if we don't fight for Pete Hegseth, they could object to all these other people. We have to sort of make an example of him, and that's going to set the tone for the rest of these confirmations. And so I think that's worked out pretty well for them.
So let's dig into some of the key issues that came up in these hearings. And specifically, these involved whether these nominees would carry out some of Trump's more controversial plans, addressing some of the things Trump has said about what he might do in a second term. One of those things is Trump has floated using the military against American citizens. He has called people the enemy within and basically created a permission structure to do that, suggested it's justified. And Hegseth was asked repeatedly about this at the hearing. Let's listen to a key exchange when Democratic Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii asked about former Trump Defense Secretary Mark Esper saying that Trump once floated shooting racial justice protesters in the legs near the White House in 2020.
Square during those
Would you
events,
carry out an order to
shield on
shoot
behalf of my
protesters
country.
in the legs?
I saw 50 Secret Service agents get injured by rioters trying to jump over the fence, set the church on fire, and destroy a statue.
That sounds to me that you will comply with such an order. You will shoot protesters in the legs.
Abby, how do you think he handled these kinds of questions? Because, Trump has talked about these things. This isn't a manufactured issue. So did he answer those questions, and what did he say?
Hegseth did not answer that question. No, Hegseth made clear during his hearing he never once indicated that he would challenge the president on anything, and that's consistent, with what he's said in the past before being nominated. He is ready to be a foot soldier for Trump. He fully believes in right-wing politics. He has been very critical in the past of the racial justice movement. In fact, that's one of his big issues, the various movements for diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in the military. He has written about that actually harming military readiness. When he goes into detail, he explains that's because sort of masculine men, particularly masculine white men, are deterred from joining the military.
Mm-hmm.
But no, Hegseth did not answer Hirono's question.
Yeah, Hannah, this seemed to be a thread that ran through not just the hearing that Abby mentioned, but also Attorney General pick Pam Bondi's hearing. She was asked a lot about things like election denial. She was asked about prosecuting opponents, and she just kind of didn't really give any firm answers on what she would do. And I think maybe that's just a reflection of the fact that she doesn't need Democrats to vote for her. She only needs Republicans to vote for her to become Attorney General, right?
Mm-hmm. And her audience for that is also Trump, right? She can't say something that Trump would be mad at in that hearing either.
Yeah. So I mentioned the Bondi hearing. She's obviously a significant figure because she would oversee the Justice Department. And Trump has talked about using the Justice Department to potentially investigate and prosecute his critics. He actually said recently that members of the House January 6th committee should be in jail. So in her hearing, she was asked about this quite a lot. And she said at one point, quote, "No one will be prosecuted, investigated because they are political opponents." She was obviously seeking to reassure at least some senators who were bringing this line of questioning. I've got some thoughts on this, but Abby, what did you make of how she answered these kinds of questions?
She seemed to reassure Democrats that she would not prosecute political opponents, that she would follow the laws of the United States. However, she sort of demurred on specific individuals, didn't want to comment on specific prosecutions. And Democrats also really drilled in on Kash Patel, who would work under her as FBI director if he is confirmed, who has really vowed retribution against a whole host of individuals. And Bondi
actually has a list of people that he put in his book. It's the list of the deep state, which Democrats have cast as a, quote, enemies list.
Right. And Bondi kind of dodged that, too. She said, Kash Patel also will follow the law, but didn't want to did not dispute that specific, individuals would be prosecuted.
I'm glad that you brought up, when she was asked about individual people that Trump and others have talked about prosecuting, because I thought there was a really interesting exchange with one of those people, who is Democratic Senator Adam Schiff of California. He was on the January 6th committee. He is a frequent target of Trump. People have accused him of lying about the January 6th situation. But rather than engage in what Bondi could kind of dismiss as hypotheticals, he instead asked her whether there was enough evidence or she saw enough evidence right now from her perch right now to pursue cases against several people like Liz Cheney, a former congresswoman, Republican from Wyoming. And that's when things got pretty heated. Let's take a listen.
Liz Cheney sitting here today. Are you aware of any factual basis to investigate Liz Cheney? Yes or no?
Senator, that's a hypothetical, and I'm not going to answer that question.
No, it's not hypothetical. I'm asking you, sitting here today, whether you are aware of a factual predicate to investigate Liz Cheney.
Senator, no one has asked me
know.
to investigate Liz Cheney. That is a hypothetical.
The president has called for it publicly. You are aware of that, aren't you?
No one has asked me to investigate.
But the president has
We're also worried about Liz Cheney,
the
Senator.
President has
You know
called
what we
for
should
this.
be worried about?
Ms. Bondi, please answer my questions.
California right now
You are
is
aware,
through the roof.
Ms. Bondi,
Guys, this felt like the first volley in what's likely to be a pretty fraught time in the next administration. These nominees are talking about these things as being hypotheticals. There are demonstrated instances of Trump in his first term trying to get his political foes investigated. A lot of those cases didn't wind up moving forward because there just wasn't any evidence there, apparently, or the Justice Department decided that there wasn't any evidence. Trump's Justice Department decided that. So, Hannah, how big a subplot do you think all of this is going to be in the months and years ahead in the Trump administration?
I feel like that's the main plot, right? Is like this dynamic that Trump had with his cabinet members, with members of the bureaucracy below him, because he was just kind of at war with them for his first term. And he said this time around, I learned that I need to pick better people and more loyal people. And that's kind of the guiding philosophy of this Trump administration.
And he talked openly about retribution. He used that word.
Yeah, for sure.
We're going to take a quick break there. And when we come back, we'll talk about the Gaza ceasefire deal and how both sides are trying to claim credit for it. We'll be right back. So on Wednesday, we got some long-awaited news, and that's that a ceasefire deal has been reached between Israel and Hamas. We're taping this on Friday morning at about 10 a.m. or so, and Israel's cabinet is in the process of formally approving the deal right now. Both Trump and Biden are taking credit for ushering in this truce, and I know, Hannah, that you have been reporting on this deal and on the politics of it. Can you just break down the back and forth about this and what we know about how this deal actually came about?
Yeah, so as the deal comes together, Trump immediately takes to Truth Social and said this was only possible because of my historic victory in November, which is classic Trump. And, that's not Biden's style, but later he does at his White House press conference about this kind of implicitly push back on that, right? And he wants this to be seen as part of his legacy as he's leaving office. He talks about how this deal is very similar to the deal that I proposed in May. And then at one point, a reporter asks him point blank, who do you think will get more credit for this, you or Trump? And Biden just says,
"Is that a joke? Oh, thank you."
And I don't even really know how to read that, but clearly there's some tension there, right?
Yeah. And we also saw some kind of conflicting signals a little bit from the administration on this. We saw State Department spokesman Matt Miller appear and gives the Trump transition team some credit, at least insofar as they were talking about, the implementation of this deal and carrying out the promises that the United States made in this deal. And then White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre was asked about this, and she initially dismissed him as some, quote, random person. And then she was informed that, no, this was actually the spokesman for the State Department.
Oh, really? Oh, I missed that exchange.
Yeah, and it was a really striking moment for me. And it kind of drove home, this is a big thing for the Biden team. They believe that he has not gotten enough credit for the things that he accomplished during his 4 years, the big infrastructure bill, recovering from the pandemic. And this seemed to be at the end of his presidency, here is this big ceasefire deal that people have been waiting for a very long time. And almost immediately, his effort to take credit for that is being undercut. I feel like it's just a really kind of telling example of his inability to sell kind of his wins over the years, or the things that he perceives as his wins.
I think that's true, but also both sides would agree here that, Trump clearly played an important role here. Mm-hmm. And the Biden officials acknowledged that his envoy, Steve Witkoff's meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu on Saturday was very important. And my colleagues talked to a diplomat who's familiar with the negotiations who basically said, part of this was Hamas was weakened, and Biden can take credit for that. But part of it was also Trump's influence. And they said this is the first time that Israel faced real pressure to come to the table and accept a deal. And I think there is an element of, that's something that he did for Trump that he probably was not willing to do for Biden for a long time. Clearly.
Yeah, I think what some people don't realize about Trump is he's firmly in Israel's camp on these things, but he's also over the 15 months or so been very upfront about being Israel, you need to wrap this up. This needs to be over. And certainly it seemed like he wanted to get this wrapped up before he took office. Abby, how significant is this deal, not just politically, but more broadly?
Well, we're going to have to wait and see, because this is the first step of potentially a larger arrangement with the rest of the hostages released and some stability and humanitarian aid returned to Gaza. However, as we speak, there is continued fighting. And so we don't know. But what's important to note here is that, this tension over whether or not Biden was going to be able to get a deal through before leaving office with Netanyahu, and this question of whether Netanyahu would even kind of drag the deal out until Trump came to office. This was a real thing. Mm-hmm. Now, Biden and Netanyahu hate each other. It's not really a secret. And this whole past 15 months of war has been really tense as the U.S. has, continued to give Israel really kind of unwavering support, as is the politically expedient thing to do. And the Biden administration has simultaneously pleaded, tried asking nicely, tried, more overt criticism and pressure to get the Netanyahu government to do certain things, for example, kill fewer civilians, hold back on kind of the rhetoric that suggests that they're trying to completely obliterate Gaza and the population there. And Netanyahu has really kind of given Biden the middle finger. Can I say that?
Yeah.
Consistently. Now, Trump and Netanyahu like each other. There's no secret about that either. And so,
although Trump was upset about
mad at him
Netanyahu
for a while,
congratulating Biden on his 2020 win.
that's right. As we know, yes.
The uncrossable line for Trump.
Right. Yes, Trump was mad at Netanyahu for recognizing the results of the Democratic election in 2020. However, I think he's gotten over that for the time being, it seems like. And Netanyahu certainly favors Trump, sees the Trump administration as far more friendly to Israel, far more tolerant of Israel's actions and Israel's right-wing government than a Democratic administration. And so it'll be interesting to see how this goes, how this plays out. If Trump does end up really, putting any pressure on Netanyahu, if he's willing to give him a longer leash and more support.
To wrap up today's show, I just wanted to take a moment to reflect on some more of the events this week. We saw Biden give his final public address from the Oval Office on Wednesday. He warned that while not naming Trump directly, that his successor is setting up a government run by a handful of ultra-wealthy people that he called oligarchs.
Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead.
That's a word that's generally attached to wealthy people overseas, not necessarily in America. And lots of people were apparently Googling that after the address. Trump has certainly picked lots of uber wealthy people for his administration. I think more than a dozen billionaires at this point. And we also saw Trump this week gearing up for a big campaign-style rally in Washington on Sunday, the day before his inauguration. What do you guys kind of make of the split screen of these two men and kind of the messages that they're putting out right now?
What stuck out to me is kind of how little it feels like I've heard about Biden as his tenure is coming to the end. And it's almost like Trump is acting like he's already in there. He's holding these freewheeling press conferences that just, dominate the headlines as they did in his first term. And so it feels like, Trump has really been the one holding everyone's attention right now. I will say the oligarch comment from Biden, I feel like that's the one thing that sort of did cut through. And I did feel like that was a moment where Biden really was able to assert himself on the way out.
Yeah, kind of setting the stage for Democratic pushback on the Trump administration moving forward. I imagine we'll be hearing that word quite a bit in the months and years ahead, judging by people's interest in it, certainly.
And it's an interesting tactic too, right? I mean, to decide what people really care about is like the wealthy having control of our politics and kind of focusing on that rather than on Trump, the man, which they've done for so many years and had limited success with this time around.
Guys, last question. Monday is Inauguration Day. What are you guys watching out for at 12 noon on Monday, not just at the inauguration, but what follows there and what Trump will do?
I think we know the broad contours of what he wants to do policy-wise on day one. He said a lot publicly about all the executive orders he's going to sign pretty much right away. But we're still waiting to see some of the details on January 6th pardons. Trump has basically left open the possibility of pardoning everyone, including people who are charged with violent offenses, charged with attacking police officers, or convicted of that.
I mean, I'm looking to see if he manages to confirm any members of his cabinet right out the gates. The Senate Armed Services Committee is expected to vote on Hegseth that day, and so that leads to the Senate voting. So we'll see if maybe he might have part of his cabinet in place pretty quickly. So that's what I'll be looking for.
So I'll be keeping an eye out for those things next week and beyond. But that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining me, Abby and Hannah.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Abby Hauslohner is a national security reporter focusing on Congress here at The Post. And Hannah Knowles is a national political reporter focused on campaigns. We'll be back next Friday to discuss the first week of the second Trump administration. And by the way, I wanted to say thank you for listening to these conversations throughout the campaign year into the transition. You'll be able to catch us in the usual places next Friday, and we'll have more soon about some programming updates. These chats have been among the most popular episodes of Post Reports for the past year. And so if you have any notes on what you're craving most right now to keep up on politics, we would love to hear from you. You can send an email to postreports@washpost.com. That's postreports@washpost.com. And as always, you can show us some love with a rating and a review. Today's episode was produced by Laura Benshoff and Rennie Svirnovsky, who also mixed the episode. It was edited by Lucy Perkins and Rachel Van Dongen. Our team also includes Maggie Penman, Rena Flores, Monica Campbell, Ted Muldoon, Alana Gordon, Ariel Plotnick, Bishop Sand, Sabby Robinson, Emma Talkoff, Sean Carter, Peter Bresnan, Allison Michaels, Renita Jablonski, Martine Powers, and Elaha Izadi. I'm Aaron Blake. Thanks for listening.